Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 17th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, let's get back to the Paris attacks, making headlines worldwide. And 24 hours after the attack, and I always start looking at websites and everything that comes out 24 hours after the attack. And the reports are, some reports are coming out again that this is another false flag. And, well, let's just get my statement out here before we get into this. I don't really care much if it is or not. It's what people believe that counts. And personally, my litmus test is if I don't see a lot of blood, if I don't see actually the guy getting killed right next to me, or myself getting wounded, or I see these tarps that they were bringing out of the French supposed places where this attack occurred. I didn't see any blood, and I saw a couple people running out of there, and I didn't see any blood whatsoever. So, that to me is my first sign that something's up. Now, don't give me this stuff that the newspapers don't want to cover blood and guts. That's how they make their money. And in a sense, if we were living in the 20s, when Capone and his boys were rattling Chicago with real bullets, that's what I want to see. Like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre right on the front page. You don't see that anymore. And why? Because it's politically correct? No. Because you got to question whether these things really happen. But the point I'm trying to make is if they do or they don't, it really makes no difference, does it? Because people believe it. The masses believe it. Everybody's sending sympathy cards. The whole thing's going on. We hate ISIS more than ever. Everybody's fighting. France declares now it's an act of war. We're at war. Okay, France, you're at war. What are you going to do? Ask for our help again? So here we go. Same story all over again. So before I get into whether it's a false flag or not, because on yesterday's show I covered it as if it was a real attack, because the real difference, there is none. Is it real or fake? In a point of view of what the people believe, it doesn't matter. Because everything is fake these days, isn't it? You watch TV and you think 10 people get killed on all those cop shows, and maybe that's the same thing we're seeing right now here. We know that it happened at the Boston Massacre. Now, those guys were bad. We could pick out so many things to show that it was a false flag, so I would agree with that. But, again, I have to preface all these shows that I do like this. To me, it matters little. The only litmus test I have, I want to see the blood. I want to really see that people died. Then I'll believe it. If you're on the battlefield, then you'll know. But the way they stage these things, you never know. But like I said, does it really matter? Not really. Doesn't particularly matter. Because people actually believe it. So here we go again. Now, what's the point of this show? I want to read something here real quick. There's an eyewitness that stated, and they put him right on TV. He was supposedly outside of the soccer field where the bombs went off, and he said a cell phone saved his life, and then he showed he had blood on his stomach t-shirt, and it looked like grape juice, and the cell phone saved his life. They didn't actually show the cell phone. I mean, if you're going to get hit by, he said shrapnel. The shrapnel hit the cell phone, saved his life. Give me a break. Now, at this particular juncture, we know that there are 1, 2, or 3 Americans right now that were killed at this. Well, let's say 2. I can't remember the third. One is a 36-year-old roadie that worked with the band that was playing in France at the time. It was a California band from Palm Desert. And one of the roadies was killed. He's 36 years old, so check out his name, where he's from. Then another one was named Naomi. She was a design student from Long Beach State. I think it was Long Beach State. And they're mourning that, and she's a design student, so we got to check out who she is. And then we got supposedly 129 to 150 dead, 99 wounded, and I saw no blood whatsoever. So I don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's like watching a video game maybe. But I'm not trying to, what really is comedy is tragedy plus time. And the more I live in this world today, the more, it used to be like I would give, like, if somebody died, I'd give them at least 6 weeks before I started making fun of them. Or a month. 2 months. But now you do it 24 hours later because, as much as you look at these things, it's always something bigger and bigger and bigger. And the point is, if they're staged, they're not staged. Does it really make a difference? But just for the sake of argument, let's look at 9 reasons why this may be another false flag. 1. How many gunmen? They reported this really quickly. It reminded me of 9/11. Already the number of individuals involved in the Paris attacks is not in question. While some reports suggested 4 shooters were involved, others suggested 3. The majority of mainstream reports seem to be only acknowledging 2. So how many shooters were there? 2, 3, 4? One witness, Pierre-Marie Bertin, a 36-year-old who was at the theater when the shooting began, stated there were as many as 4. Bertin described some male hostages who went into the balcony and tried to negotiate for the life of their wives with one of the guys. It was sickening. Bertin recounted somewhat more detail than some other witnesses and was clear that there were as many as 4 gunmen. Australian news media is reporting that 3 gunmen have been killed. This might seem inconsequential to readers, but in informed researching circles, it is well known that the information that comes out shortly after the event is usually the most reliable. That's correct. So you got to look 24 in that first period when it happens. This is not to discount there'll be confusion, panic reports coming from witnesses, etc. However, the information coming out early on has not yet been subjected to the top-down media revision that will be inevitably take place as this story gets to be molded by the narrative. So, we're looking at the gunmen. Another mention of additional gunmen after this point is ridiculed as conspiracy. Now, the types of weapons used. Let's look here. While some reports suggest that the attackers were using AK-47s, other reports are suggesting shotguns. While the contradiction in reports can certainly be attributed to victims and witnesses simply not being aware of the type of weapons being used in the attacks and in panic in the heat of the moment, there is nonetheless contradiction in the reports being used. As of the time of the writing here, we're talking about this, and I'm referring to someone who's talking about this story, there has been no clarification as to what type of weapons were used. Since the assailants were supposedly killed by police, it should be clear what weapons they used. They were supposedly killed. And that's another quick thing. They always kill those people, so and now they're searching everywhere else. Now, were the gunmen killed or arrested? While the number of gunmen itself is in doubt, news reports coming from Fox are suggesting that a suspected gunman was actually arrested. In fact, the suspect allegedly stated to police, "I am from ISIS," giving us all the information we need as for who is responsible for this attack. Well, they don't want just some crazy people to be responsible. It has to be ISIS here, doesn't it? Now, the gunmen connected to ISIS, gunmen connected to Syria, along with the very convenient and immediate statement by an allegedly arrested suspect that he was from ISIS. We also have screams of a shooter that this is for Syria. This gives us all the information that we need regarding the motivation of the attackers. They are ISIS. They hate the French because the French are attacking ISIS, and because somewhere in France, in a very dark corner, under the sofa, there are freedoms. ISIS hates freedoms. This is quite coincidental, considering the fact that a Russian airliner was recently bombed allegedly by ISIS, at least according to the West. Now, the timing of the event. Let's look at number 5. And this is coming from the activistpost.com, and this has been reprinted now in several other places. And I want to get this out because this is when you really start thinking about all this stuff, and then pretty soon as the time goes on, everybody forget there's so many of these now. I mean, I can't keep up with them. Like I said, my litmus test is blood. Actually seeing somebody dead and shot in the head or something, and I don't want to sound, but that's the truth. You don't see any. I mean, it's like a video game when you watch these supposed attacks. And you know something? I was a journalist. I know how papers sell. They sell with blood and guts. Publishers love it. That's what they want on the front page. Everybody's going to buy it. But they don't do it anymore. Why? Maybe if they did, people would start reading the newspaper again. But anyway, this timing of the event. Aside from obvious connotations derived from the attacks occurring on Friday the 13th, isn't that interesting? The Paris massacre has taken place shortly before a major climate summit that was set to take place in France. The French government was expecting massive protests they alleged could potentially become violent by activists opposed to globalization and energy austerity. Interesting enough, France had already planned to impose border controls starting on November 30th in anticipation of the UN Conference on Climate Change in Paris. Now let me mention this. This climate change thing is such a bogus thing. They're going to blame people who drive cars for everything. And then they're going to take away your cars and take away your gas. And they're going to make you walk. Yeah. Well, that ain't bad. But give me a break. But because of the terrorist threat or risk of public disorder now, they're doing this in France. This was prior to this supposed attack. Needless to say, there will be no massive protests now, considering the fact that 2015 France resembles the 1943 version of itself more than anything else. They're closing the borders. No one's going to protest now. Security. Now, listen to this. Security drills. Could this be another false flag drill? One hallmark of false flags operations is the running of drills. Yes, the running of drills shortly before an attack. Many times these drills will involve the actual sequence of the events that takes place during the real-life attack that you think is the real-life attack. These drills have been present on large-scale false flags such as 9/11, as well as smaller scales like the shooting in Aurora, Colorado. We can go on and talk about 9/11, the 7/7 bombings in London. Although one reason we can take precedence over the other, when we start looking at this, the nature and purpose of these drills are used by false flag operators for at least two reasons. One such purpose is the creation of intentional confusion if the drill is taking place during the actual attack. The other more effective aspect, however, is using the drill as a cloak to plan the attack or even go live when it comes time to launch the event. Even more so, it gives the individuals who are involving the planning of the event an element of cover. Now, were there any attacks or drills going on here? I don't know. Now remember, the UK conducted counter-terrorism drills this year that included scenarios that involved terror attacks in Paris, similar to those that took place on the Charlie Hebdo massacre. Remember that? That took place. As the reports surrounding the UK drills were released, a number 10 spokesmen confirmed it had been agreed that future exercises, which take place on a regular basis, should seek to learn from the events in France. David Cameron himself stated there was a need for police to call on military help if there was a major emergency. You know, the recent Paris attacks were very similar to the Charlie Hebdo massacre that occurred earlier this year. Charlie Hebdo attacks, however, were largely revealed as a false flag operation, evidence for which can be seen in, when you start reading some of the signs of the Hebdo attack. Now, we get into this idea of who controls ISIS. I did a show on it yesterday, so we're not going to get into it deeply, but if the main goal is chaos, and the main goal, here's what I always wondered, though. If they really want to cause chaos, they can pay people. Can they pay people to blow themselves up? I don't know. Did anybody see anybody get blown up? I mean, if people are getting blown up and there's 150 people killed at all these things, I should have seen one drop of blood. That's the point I want to make. Somehow, the news media misses it. I can't get it. They see all the craziness going on, but they miss that one aspect that I don't see how it can be missed in a massacre like this. Do you? Do you really see how it could be missed? Okay, let's move on here. Going through some of the things you should think about when you start looking at these events on TV. Now, the one real important aspect of the whole thing is whether they happen, whether it was a terrorist attack or whether it wasn't. The idea of where this comes from has to be sorted out, and that's what I try to do on my shows, and I think I did it pretty well yesterday, but I'll save one for tomorrow or the next day. But moving on, I look 24 hours after one of these things, and then I start looking who's writing about these things outside of the mainstream, and I ran across an article that was just penned quickly by Paul Craig Roberts. And this happened right immediately after. It was on November 13th, so it was right after the attack. Now, I've interviewed in the past, maybe 8-9 years ago, Paul Craig Roberts. And he's an old Republican crony that is now claiming that he is seeing the light, and he is a good guy, and he's seeing the truth and wants to tell us about it. Now, a lot of people think he's a agent in disguise. Others say he tells the truth. Like I say, I come across to you again, it doesn't matter. Now, I've talked to him, and obviously he knows things from one side or the other. Where he wants to take you, I don't know. I don't read much of his stuff anymore. But I thought I'd go through this article with you to see if anything comes out that maybe gives me an idea of what's really happening there, because he must know. Now, whether he's an insider that's trying to lead you somewhere or not, he knows more than I do, because he deals with these people more than I do. He's on a regular basis. He was a heavyweight Republican for years. I don't know how these guys, it's not to say that the guy can't change his colors. And I've never believed in the story that an old dog can't be taught new tricks. But let's listen to what he says so we understand maybe a little bit more about what's going on. He said at 7 p.m. on Friday the 13th, they do this Friday the 13th in Paris. Now, when you go back in history to Friday the 13th, when the Knights Templars were taken down, where, the same area. Interesting. That tells me a little bit here this is a planned attack. Now, most of you aren't going to believe me when I say that, but most of you don't read history like I do. So let's go back and Look at this. He says on Friday the 13th, we don't have much information about the terrorist attacks in Paris other than the Paris is closed down, like Boston was after the Boston Marathon bombing. Also, he says a suspected false flag attempt. I don't say it's suspected. I think it was. I mean, when you look at the evidence there, you just go, okay, guys, you did a bad job in staging that one. But again, people believe it. It doesn't matter. Possibly believable evidence will be presented that Paris attacks were real. However, what do refugees, now he looks into it, have to gain from making themselves unwelcome with acts of violence committed against the host country? Well, if he's looking at this, he's not going to get into anything that has to do with this idea that, we're creating ISIS. He's looking at it from the point of view of just people that may want to go wrong. And he's right when you say that. And that's why none of this makes sense. And that's why when he says this, it lays more credibility to what I'm saying, that it has to be orchestrated. Because why would refugees in France who want to come there want to do harm to a place they want to come from? Unless they had an ulterior motive that when they were funded. And where did these guys get these weapons and bombs? And think about, where would the French themselves obtain them? Guess who? From us. Now he goes in and he says this paragraph here, it's interesting. The millions of refugees from Washington's wars who are overrunning Europe are bringing to the forefront of European politics the anti-EU nationalist parties, such as one in Germany, one in UK, one in France. These EU political parties are also anti-immigrant political parties. And the reason that's happening is he's saying Washington's wars are driving all these people there. Partly true. The latest French polls show that as a result of the refugees from our wars, one of their parties is coming out on top because they don't want to see their country destroyed. Can you blame them? And I'm adding those words. But by supporting all these wars over in the Middle East and etc., he says, establishment European governments eroded their support. See, he's still playing this Hegelian dialectic for you. I don't go that route. This is controlled. This whole thing has been organized. He's giving you kind of let's say an alternative view to this. I go a little step farther and say this thing is all orchestrated. European peoples want to be French, German, Dutch, Italian, Hungarian, Czech, British. They don't want their countries to be diverse. The Tower of Babel created by millions of refugees from Washington's wars. Okay, but why do we go to war? What is the end game? I'll come back to some of his articles. We only have like a minute before I take a break, but I'll come back to some more of what he's saying. But is it possible, folks, when you think about what happened in France, is this just another way to set us up for more to come here, more to come all over, to pit this supposed Islamic state against all of Western civilization? You'd bet it is. And then I hear all the Pope and everybody crying, oh, we feel so sorry for the French. Everybody was right on this thing. But the real point is, they are the ones orchestrating it. And that is the double talk you have to get through to really get to the truth. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this November 17th, 2015 day on our calendar. And I want to just finish up this article by Paul Craig Roberts and then move on to certain things. I just want to refresh your memory after this about the Jesuits and some thoughts. I found somebody, more and more people are writing about it and talking about it. The question now becomes, what do you do? And I've spent much time on that since I've been doing this for almost 25 years, 30 years. I'm running out of time, to be honest with you, at least here on this place. But let's go back to what Paul Craig Roberts was saying. And we were talking about the possibility that this is a false flag in Paris, or it really did happen. And my advice to you is, what's the difference? If you really want to find out, if you're in California, I think it's going to be pretty easy, really. And I think if you take my lead on this, let's find out who Naomi, that's her name, Gonzalez is. She's a design student, senior, 23 years old, supposedly killed there, from, I believe, Long Beach State, or one of those schools. I'll have to go back and maybe maybe I'm saying the wrong school, but it's somewhere in Southern California. It's right up here, Southern California. So let's trace her family. Now, Gonzalez is a name that's going to be tough to trace, but I think if we go into records at the school, they say, and we have to go back right now, CNN is reporting that, and Fox as well. So get that immediately, who this girl is. Find out who her fans see, and see if they bring the body back, and if there's actually a funeral. And really, they're talking about it now in terms where the whole campus is mourning this death. Well, let's see if it really happened. That'd be one way to do it, if you guys have to settle the fact that it is false or not. My question is, what is the difference? They're going to get the same result because most people won't go that far. And the point is, I've always said this, well, if they're really into like genocide, what's the difference? Why don't they use real bullets? Play war like Al Capone did back in the 20s instead of this, all these false flags going on. You get the same result. You can have just a little bit more, truth in the idea of what you're doing. Okay. But anyway, that's just me, the way I think about it. But going back to Paul Craig Roberts in this article, that he's talking that possibly it's a false flag, possibly it's not. He gets into more of the geopolitical strategy and doesn't get right down to who's really doing this, or still playing he's not even going to tell you what the Hegelian dialectic is. Like I said, I've interviewed Paul before in the past, and he's an insider, an old Republican, so who knows what side he's on. But like I said again, who cares? He knows something, doesn't he? So let's find out what he knows. He says, France is going through this whole stage, right? Realizing its vulnerability, he says, it's entirely possible that the French establishment made a decision to protect its hold on power with a false flag attack that would allow the establishment to close France's borders and thereby deprive, he's talking about this other political party that's opposed to all the immigration to take hold. Okay, so he's closing the borders. That's it. We're going to stop this other political party. Who knows? I think that's a kind of a naive look at it. It's kind of like the way we look at American politics here. Very naive. Oh, the Republicans are fighting the Democrats, and we have to worry about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. It doesn't matter who's there. And I will say, if Marine Le Pen, and that's the party that in France that's opposing immigration, gets in, it won't be any different anyway. So he's not getting to the heart of the problem, but it's nice to look at this, for example. Now he gets into something that's interesting to me. Some people are so naive and stupid as to think that no government would kill its own citizens. Now he's getting to the point here. But governments do it all the time, don't they? He says. There are an endless number of false flag events, such as, and he's talking about Operation Gladio, and I was there right when this was going on. Operation Gladio was a CIA Italian intelligence operation that relentlessly bombed innocent Italians, such as those waiting at a train station, murdering hundreds, and then blaming the violence on the European communist parties in post-World War II era in order to block the communists from electoral gains. I was there during the Bologna bombing, and the president of Italy revealed the truth about Operation Gladio. Yeah, he said you can read and you can read all these details in a number of books. The bombings were not done, and was widely reported in a corrupt Western media by communists. The bombings were done by Italian intelligence aided by the CIA. It wasn't done by communists. It was done by, and this has been reported, and I was talking about this for years, why they were testing out terrorism there. The bombings were done by Italian intelligence, aided by CIA. Of course the Jesuits were involved. In one of the Italian investigative hearings, a member of the Italian intelligence said that the sites to be bombed were chosen in order to maximize the deaths of women and children because these victims were most useful in discrediting the communists. Now, considering what's going on in France and considering what happened in Italy back then in the 80s, don't you think it's going to happen here again? We're going to have more and more of this. I would suggest that for the outcome, it's not really going to matter if it was a false flag event or not, because what's laid in the minds of people is the important thing. But if you really want to get down to it, I think one real key element two elements to check are the two people they're reporting killed from the United States. One from Palm Desert, California. He's a roadie that worked with this band that appeared in France where this attack occurred, and the other was a supposed design student in France, a senior I believe at Long Beach State, Naomi Gonzalez. So let's check those two people out. If you're in Southern California and you're researching, let's find out if they're really going to have funerals and if they really were killed, because they will be, their bodies will be brought back if that happened. And I'd be wondering if, if you really want to get to the truth on that aspect of it, that's the way to start. But all of it's going to get messy in the weeks to come, and you're going to hear all these kind of articles, and all these things are coming about, and people are going to start arguing more about whether it was a false flag or a real event than realizing the outcome that they're going to get out of this, what's going to really happen. And that's the point. So the point is made, whether it's a false flag or not, and I think we should move on from that point. Now, I've got about, 15, 20 minutes left. And what I really wanted to do was to get back to the papal conspiracy. And perhaps give you just an overview. And I'm going to call on a couple things that have been written about it, just to let you know what really is going on in general. And I'll do that real quickly. The agents, of course, are the Jesuits. And this is from Daniel Doria. Even though the Jesuits exude vast influence and control, theology, education, recorded history, he's still perplexed that there's never been anything written about it. In the 20th century, the Jesuits have conducted the Inquisition under the names of Nazism, fascism, communism, and now Islamic terrorism. And it goes on. But how come we never get to the truth of it? Well, let me tell you, Daniel, they're good at hiding things, and they're not going to tell you exactly what they're doing. What they're going to do is tell you just the opposite. And what you have to do is look at the fruits of their work. Who's going to benefit from this whole thing? And who always benefits? Think about it. That'll give you the idea, because you're going to have to make suppositions. Never before in the course of world history had such a society appeared. The old Roman Senate itself did not lay schemes for world domination with greater certainty of success than these people. He says, in order to know the truth of seemingly random or chaotic events and to understand them, one must only ask one question, he says. Let's see what he says. Who benefits? Yes, now he's on the right track. Who benefits? It's a man after my own heart. The Nazi movement. Who benefited there? Let's look at that. It goes on and on. We could, Hitler, Franco, Stalin, now bin Laden, today the Black Pope orders his office of the Inquisition renamed in 1965 the Sacred Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith through his intelligence community headed by papal knights including Skull and Bonesman Bush and others who are coming into office of the White House. The public is practically unaware of the overwhelming responsibility carried by the Vatican and its Jesuits in the starting of the 2 world wars and a planned third one. We are witnessing right as we speak today. Don't be naive. A situation which may be explained in part by the gigantic finances at the disposition of the Vatican, its Jesuits, giving them power in so many spheres that, it's kind of almost unbelievable. And let me say this. When I covered a couple little stories just recently, in the last few years, when they can pay out $255 million, and it's just like a drop in the bucket, because they wanted to silence a story about how they were killing Native American kids in the mission schools up until the 70s, then they got a lot of money. If you examine the facts, you will find that they aim at universal domination. Let me say this. I'm going to give you 3 words. Deception, domination, death. That's what they deal with, the 3 Ds. And that means this: if you're not going to follow or be on their side, and they don't even care, you might be one of the, a person that they want to sacrifice. They don't care. They want it in their coffers. And if you examine the facts, you will find they aim at this domination alone, and they get it through death. They have rendered themselves indispensable to the Pope. That's the Jesuits, who without them could not exist, because Catholicism is identified with them. It's kind of like the good and the bad cop. You can't have the Vatican without the other. You can't have one without the other. The Pope and the Black Pope, married together. And examine the facts. Constantly look at what they're doing. They're not going to tell you. You got to go deep, because they've rendered themselves indispensable to governors, to popes, to world leaders. Revolutions are held in their hands. And in this way, under one name or another, it is they who rule the world. And remember yesterday I talked to you about that priest, the Jesuit priest Del Oglio, who was the one who's basically the insider that made sure ISIS was going to grow, and he went there as a pacifist, supposedly, to inspire revolution, to inspire hatred, killings. That's what he did. They're doing that today. Now, that's exactly what they have planned. Now, this Jesuit order, known as the Society of Jesus, has long played an incredibly influential but secretive role in the destinies of nations, organizations, and individuals. Rulers, presidents, scholars, and even Catholics themselves, who are aware of the evil perpetrated by this powerful, far-reaching order, have left on record grave warnings that all should heed. And this is Daniel Doria, who got this all together here. See, sir, from this chamber I govern not only Paris, but China. Not only China, but the whole world. And that was, I remember bringing that quote to you 10 years ago. That was a Jesuit general from, I forget when. But Jesuitism inspired its followers with fanaticism. There was no crime too great for them. Even the killing of Kennedy was fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the Pope and the Church, and their interests too. Global domination. Under various disguises, Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to the highest offices in the land. Now, remember when I mentioned the story about Tupper Sassi, and when he was being targeted by them, he even found out the prosecutor that was charging him with bogus IRS charges was a Jesuit priest. The religion of Masonry is a system of absolute despotism, and like that of Rome, demands a blind and questioning obedience to all its laws, rules, and edicts, whether right or wrong, nor will it contribute a little to your advantage. If with caution and secrecy we foment and heighten the animosities that arise among princes and great men, even to such a degree that they may weaken each other, that's what they do. But if they appear any likelihood of reconciliation, then as soon as possible let us endeavor to be the mediators, lest others prevent it. Finally, let all with such artfulness gain the ascendant over princes, noblemen, and the magistrates of every place, that they may be ready at our beck and call. Finally, you'll see, when you start looking at them this way, how powerful they really are. And the real important thing is what's going on today with ISIS is the culmination of this. This is going to get interesting, very interesting, because putting aside all private judgment, we should always be ready to accept this principle. that I just mentioned. I will believe that the white I see is black. Saying it again. If the hierarchy church so defines it. That's what they think. If they want to change white to black, they can do it. And they'll do anything and deceive you in the most unbelievable ways. The only thing we can do is to understand it and then to tell others. Now, let's move on. A few minutes left on the Investigative Journal. I hope you're enjoying. I'm going to comment on Daniel Doria's comments here as well. And he's collected some quotes from people that have written about this. And he says this, one of the quotes is, "Princes and persons of distinction. This is Jesuits speaking everywhere, must by all means be so managed that we may have their ear, and that will easily secure their hearts, by which way of proceeding all persons will become our creatures." And no one would dare to give the Society of Jesus any opposition. Finally, the Society must endeavor to effect this at least, that having gotten the favor and authority of princes, those who do not love them at least fear them. Every species of vice finds its patronage in them. There's no perjury, no sacrilege, no parricide, nor incest, nor rapine, nor fraud, nor treason, which cannot be masked as meritorious beneath the mantle of their dispensation. And one of the things I have to mention is, if you realize just the average person's reaction to people these days that they don't know, they're suspect to everyone, because the Jesuit order and the news media and our government has laid this foundation that everyone has to be wary of his fellow man. You can't trust anybody, right? I mean, you go on and on. People are just so suspicious of everybody. And it is really benefiting the Jesuits and the people that are causing the problems. Because, you know what? I would bet if I dressed up one day as a Jesuit priest, or just put on the cloak of a pastor or something, more people would trust me. And those are the ones you shouldn't trust. That's the point I'm trying to make. Just make up a robe one day and go out looking like a Catholic priest and see how many people come up. Oh, they think you're holier than thou. The Jesuits have benefited from this deceit, creating so much hatred, between people that people don't even want to talk to you. They think everybody's a mass murderer, when in fact the mass murderers are getting away with it. That's the point I'm trying to make. Don't fall for their deception. They are a public plague. It's really what they are. And they're the plague of the world. From the Jesuit colleges, there never is sent anything. And let me go back and say this. From their colleges, it is incredible the things that are just, all they want you to do is be obedient to their ways, devoted to them, loyal to them, not to be a free thinker or to be an American or anything. It's incredible. The organization of the Roman Catholic hierarchy is a complete military operation of which the Pope or the Black Pope are the ostensible heads. The Black Pope is the head of the order of the Jesuits, called the General. He not only has command of his order, but directs and controls the general policy of the whole Vatican. That for sure. He is the power behind the throne, and is the real potential head of the hierarchy. And that's just a little bit of I just wanted to go back and do a little bit, of work. I used to talk in generalities about them and then became more specific. But when you really understand these guys, the idea that, and I've always said this, you have to know who they are, and then you have to realize you're never going to get rid of them. They're going to be here forever. Their power will grow, but you have to understand how to live with it. And I think by not being threatening in the manner that I am, look, am I giving them the benefit of the doubt even on the Paris attacks? Yes. I said, look, if it's a real or false, you get your point across. You're doing it. I can't stop it. I'm not going to ever stop them from doing anything. What we can do, though, is begin to understand the reality of what they're doing, of who they are and what their end game really is. And it isn't any good for you or me. Now, you may not be here long enough to see what they're going to do, but it's going to pass on from generation to generation. And my only wish would be, God, I would love to see what America's going to look like in 100 years. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.